Lydia stood there, still holding the heavy mallet in her hand, staring at Beetlejuice as he glared between her and her weapon. Her mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. Should she run? Should she strike again? But as she watched, Beetlejuice seemed to decide on something because his expression shifted. He grinned.
Well, well, well. Look who's all grown up,
he drawled with a leer that crawled up and down her form slowly. Lydia was tempted to use the mallet again. She knew she couldn't kill him, but maybe she could inflict some more pain. But instead she just stood there dumbly, cursing herself for not having a plan. She kept her eyes on Beetlejuice, unsure if anyone else could see her or if she was completely alone in this strange world. He took a step forward, which made Lydia backpedal, hammer clenched in her hands and ready to strike. But the poltergeist stopped his advance and raised his hands in smug surrender.
Oh boy,
he continued when Lydia couldn't find a single word to say.
Hey, little girl, are we lost?
He cooed, his voice taunting and full of faux innocence.
What is this place?
She blurted out, hoping for some answers from the poltergeist. Not once had she tried to find a way back home. She didn't even want to think about whether she was truly lost or not. Beetlejuice looked at her, his expression blank.
Shit, and I thought you were the smart deets.
He motioned around himself as if the answer should be obvious.
It's a fucking theme park. What the fuck does it look like?
He remembered her. He actually remembered her. She didn't think he'd forgotten, so she wasn't sure why the fact filled her with relief. Undaunted, she shook it off. There was no way she would let her guard down around him.
I know it's a theme park, asshole,
she muttered. He chuckled, looking too amused as he lowered his hands behind his back and swayed onto his heels. Smug as you please.
So you turned into a proper witch after all. Nice.
He gave her another surveying look, but it seemed less lecherous. To her surprise, he actually appeared to be impressed.
Solid astral projection you got going on? Should I be flattered that you came to visit little old me? I didn't come here for you.
Lydia spat.
Uh-huh. Sure,
he said, obviously not believing her. He grinned again, sleazy and all too knowing.
You had to have a destination in mind for it to work. So are you saying you actually wanted to land in this?
He raised his arms in a swooping and grand motion around them.
Barrel of laughs? How do I get home? Ah.
He clasped his hands behind his back again and tilted his head in exaggerated thought.
So you are lost.
He looked away and made a put-upon sigh. Then he glanced back at her with a hooded gaze and a smirk.
Well, since I'm such a stand-up guy, I guess I can help.
Those words echoed out of the past as well, a reminder of a time when Lydia last brokered a deal with him. Shit, she thought again, and not for the last time either.
Let me guess.
She smirked back at him, though the thought of being actually lost in the astral plane had taken its toll on her nerves.
We need rings, Valentino?
Shockingly, Beetlejuice threw his head back and cackled. Now this was more like the poltergeist she'd met so many years ago. The idea brought a smile to her face, but the thought of Beetlejuice seeing it filled her with dread. She schooled her features quickly, but had a feeling the ghost was not fooled. He gave her an appraising look and bit his lower lip.
Since that deal of ours is what got me in this clusterfuck of a situation in the first place, how about a new deal?
Lydia balked. The reason Beetlejuice had ended up here and in that strange trance was because of what he'd done to her. Somehow, as much as she knew he might have deserved it, it didn't sit right with her.
Like?
He smiled, then lifted one foot and shook it. The sound of a rattling chain caught her attention, and Lydia finally took her eyes off his face to investigate. Looking down at his feet, she saw that they were inexplicably chained to the ground.
How about you use that toe crusher on this here chain, and I show you how to get back to your body. No vows of everlasting love needed. No,
she said at once and looked back to find him leaning forward into her personal space. She reared back and lifted the hammer higher.
You tell me first, and then I set you free.
He tisked and wagged a finger.
No dice. You see, that way didn't work out for me the last time. How do I know you won't?
He furrowed his brow with confusion and then scoffed.
What, hurt you? Well, I can't now, can I? You actually have some brains and cast a protection spell. Very clever. So I can't touch you. No one here can.
She had faith in her spell up until she stupidly decided to interfere with the poltergeist, but she knew she couldn't trust him.
Prove it.
Beetlejuice rolled his eyes and groaned with exasperation.
Fine, come here. Hell no.
Annoyed, Beetlejuice threw up his hands and slapped them hard against his sides.
How the heck do you want me to prove it then?
Lydia looked around wildly and spotted a stuffed toy.
I want the cat.
She pointed with the hammer.
I want it fair and square. Huh?
She shrugged.
Just, I don't know, throw it at me or something. See if it touches me. Christ on a cracker,
he muttered and shook his head. Beetlejuice made a big show of sauntering up to the stuffed animal display, his eyes glinting with a mischievous glimmer. Lydia watched him warily, her heart pounding with anticipation. She knew all too well that Beetlejuice was not to be trusted, and she braced herself for some sort of evil trick or prank. But instead of lunging at her or cackling maniacally, Beetlejuice plucked the stuffed animal off the display with a theatrical flourish, grinning widely. He held it up, turning it over in his hands, examining it with feigned interest. Lydia watched him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He finally tossed the stuffed animal at her. Lydia flinched, bracing herself for impact. To her surprise, the stuffed animal bounced away as if it had hit an invisible force field mid-air. Lydia felt a small surge of relief as most of the previous tension fled her. Decision made, she tightened her grip on the mallet.
Okay, stick out your foot.
He seemed to appreciate her willingness, but also remained wary. Beetlejuice stuck his foot out and joked,
Try not to get my pinky toe again, if you please. It hurt like a bitch.
Shuffling on her feet to gain better purchase, Lydia wound up the mallet, aiming for the center of the chain. As she swung it down with all her might, there was a deafening clang that resonated through the air, making the ground shake beneath them. The ghouls in the vicinity froze in place as it happened, and Lydia's heart thundered in her ears, waiting for everyone to finally see her. But they merely glanced around, blinking as if they had merely just discovered themselves to be standing in the middle of a theme park. The chain shook violently for a moment before finally giving way, its links breaking apart with a deafening clang before it clattered harmlessly to the ground. Both Lydia and Beetlejuice stood frozen in shock, staring at the broken chain for a silent moment as the unfrozen ghouls ignored them in favor of murmuring excitedly amongst themselves and scattering to play the games. It was then that Beetlejuice looked up at Lydia, his eyes wide with amazement.
It worked,
he breathed, as if he had never expected it to.
Holy shit, it worked!
Lydia couldn't help but chuckle at his surprised face.
I guess it did.
She glanced around and saw the park-goers around them had gained a bit of color to their now animated faces. Whatever she had done, it had obviously affected the others as well. There was little time to think about it more because Beetlejuice got right up into her space with a mischievous grin.
Thanks a bunch, babes,
he drawled.
You really did me a solid. Sure you don't want to get hitched instead of just going home? I could show you a real good time.
Lydia stood her ground, which unfortunately he seemed to appreciate.
Has. Things to do, places to be. Now are you going to hold up your end of the deal, or what? Unlike someone...
He gave her a pointed look.
I always keep my promises.
He elongated the S like a snake and then chuckled.
All right then, Dorothy.
He lifted his hand, and in his open palm was a silver shimmering cord.
Just gotta yank your chain and say home 3 times.
She gave him a disbelieving arch of her brow and slowly brought her open hand up. He tilted his own hand and let the chain fall into hers. It had some weight, but it was light and airy. She pulled at it with curiosity and felt a tug in her gut. She wondered how she hadn't seen it before, as a thin chain sticking out of her belly should have been something she noticed.
Thanks,
she said warily. It seemed too good to be true. She pulled on the chain 3 times.
Home, home, home.
Beetlejuice took a step back and nodded.
See ya around, lids.
There was no time for a retort. Lydia opened her mouth and was swept away, and the last thing she saw was a glint in those blue eyes that could only mean trouble, and she had set him loose. Again. Lydia awoke with a gasp in her bed, hair mussed and eyes wild.
What have I done?
Thank you for listening. You can find the written version of this story by clicking the link in the description. Please like and subscribe for more. And let me know what you think of this story.